Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden. Vote. Oh, no, I shouldn't say that. Right, go on.
We might come to your view on voting in a minute.
Green. Yeah.
We have a long list for you today, so we'll do the best we can with what we have. And the first thing that we should perhaps comment on is the fact that Cardinal ZEN, the wonderful Cardinal ZEN, has written quite a surprising, I think, quite a surprising and stinging attack against Michael Lofton, who runs the Reason and Theology podcast, because he says that Michael Lofton accuses him, Cardinal ZEN, of not following the hermeneutics of continuity when criticising the fiducia supplicant. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment. We also want to mention Cardinal O'Malley, who is an 80-year-old cardinal in Boston, has not yet had his retirement accepted by Pope Francis, and is speaking up in support of Rupnik's victims, saying that the art shouldn't be displayed. And this is contrary to what Paolo Ruffini of the Vatican Communications said just recently. And also very interesting news about the Vatican ex-Auditor General, Libero Malone, says that Cardinal Pell's death is still shrouded in mystery. So there may be some things to uncover there if he doesn't suddenly decide to take his own life. A little something on Miriam Cates here, a very strange story about Miriam Cates, which we'll get to. And then also, Gavin, I know you want to share something about an article you've written that has just been published today about the growing Islamic threat in the UK. And of course, Mark, who lives in Southend, many of you watching will know that Mark's former MP was murdered by Islamists just a few years ago. So that very real threat, Gavin will share more on that. But let's begin with ZEN. So Cardinal ZEN has spoken against this chap who runs, what's his name? Michael Lofton, that's it. Were you surprised by this, Mark? I was a bit. It was really quite stinging, wasn't it?
Well, and funny. I thought it was really amusing the way he did it. He said, like, man with a big head and a little beard. But then he does go on to sort of say that he doesn't, Lofton doesn't really know what he's talking about. Although he says he's not a theologian, but it seems to me that he understands the differentiated authority of the Vatican documents less than any one of my catechumens. So he really did slap him about a bit, Cardinal ZEN. And it's well deserved, to be honest. Michael Lofton is a horrendous nightmare. And our friend at the City of Truth, if you wanted to look up that YouTube channel, the City of Truth, there are a number of very well done videos on there explaining the sophistry of Michael Lofton. But basically, this is a guy who was an Eastern Orthodox and converted to Catholicism. And he sort of had left the Catholic Church. He was a trad and he left the Catholic Church. So he's kind of all over the show, really. And he's obviously made some sort of mental leap to sort of rejoin the Catholic Church, which has meant that he's had to get behind every jot and tittle that Pope Francis comes out with, which puts him in all kinds of bizarre positions. If you watch anything that he says, I have to say I don't frequent his stuff, but I know that our friends Rob and Anthony at Avoiding Babylon have got quite involved in some of the polemic, and I think Lofton has sort of brings people on the channel to sort of try and boost things and then drops them or whatever. So he's not a very pleasant character. But I thought Cardinal ZEN's, sort of evisceration of him was absolutely top notch, to be honest.
It was really good, wasn't it? It's linked here, so do take a look at it yourself. This line, he says, "It will be said that Mr. Lofton is defending the Pope, and nobody can blame him for that. But I am sure his nonsense will not help the Holy Father in any way." It's quite biting. What did you make of that, Cardinal ZEN's response to Michael Lofton, Gavin?
I liked Mark's introduction. That was very helpful. I don't trust Michael Lofton, but not because... this is very difficult. The major thing I want to say is that Catholic commentary ought to be aimed at the principle and not the person. And so I think one of the difficulties I have two difficulties with Michael Lofton. First of all, he assassinates people, which I don't like. And secondly, I don't like him, which I'm cross with, because I want to be free of not liking him in order to make the point that we should like each other and not do this on personalities. I mean, I remember that, you know, when we criticized what Calvin was saying to Taylor Marshall, Calvin was unable to see that we were not talking about him personally. Essentially, we were talking about the principles that he was enunciating. And I think one of the things that we have to do as commentators is do our very best to not make it personal, to keep the whole ego thing as far at bay as we can, and to talk with as much humility and charity as we're able to do. And, you know, it's quite difficult sometimes to do it with a sense of humor, but at the same time, people do make asses of themselves, and they do say silly things, and it's quite hard to distinguish between what they bring to the table and what their views are, as Mark has just shown us with Lofton. So the next thing, I was very excited about Cardinal ZEN watching podcasts. I hope in a moment of narcissistic egotism that he watches us too, or we'd certainly invite him over. But we should deal with principles. We should do it with charity and humility.
Mm. Well, hello, Cardinal ZEN, if you're watching, do look at our membership options.
We'll give you a discount on gold. You can get a gold for silver from us.
You always earned a gold, for sure. So I'm glad you don't dislike Lofton because he's a big man with a little beard, Gavin. No,
do you know? But you know, we've got to watch pomposity, haven't we? I mean, I suppose it comes to us all. That's the trouble. I watched someone had him talking, and they dubbed over a call to intifada over him in Arabic. And
yeah,
it just, you know,
brilliant.
it was. I'm sorry, Michael, but you know, it went too easily, and I thought to myself, whatever happens, you mustn't talk on the internet in a way that would allow people to dub Arabic intifada rhetoric over your voice. It's not a good look.
You are so far from that, Gavin Ashenden. Cardinal O'Malley, Mark. Cardinal O'Malley speaks clearly on Father Rupnik and his art, saying that the Vatican should say no more. And this is just a week or two after Paolo Ruffini of the Vatican Communications said something awful, something like, what was it? Well, at least he didn't abuse kids.
I was going to put it more colloquially than that. So I'm really grateful that you put it much more eloquently than I was going to. But yeah,
because that's what he really said. Yeah.
Well, and this is where we are with all this. Interestingly, we've also had the Bishop of Lourdes, which is in France, if you don't know, and one of my favourite places. There's loads of Rupnik stuff on the outside of the Rosary Basilica, and they've been looking into it. They've had a commission looking into it. And today that bishop has said that they're going to do something. That they're going to do something about it, but it's typically long and torturous. You know, sort of like they're not quite sure what they're going to do about it or whatever. But they're going to actually they have decided to do something about it. So that chimes in really well with Cardinal O'Malley, he's the head of the child protection element of the Vatican, and someone that like. Gavin has just interviewed Hans Zollner, who was he was high up in that dicastery and left because he couldn't get anywhere. So I'm not saying that O'Malley is without criticism at all. He is. He's also 80, so he's offered his resignation 5 years ago, and the Pope has kept him on, which is interesting. So, and he's been criticised by Zollner, and he's also been criticised by the Irish woman who was on the board with him. I can't remember, her name escapes me at the moment, but basically some of the other people on the board have been, sort of critical. So it makes you wonder, is O'Malley working, is he sort of working with the Vatican and being stumped on some issues? I don't know. And then he does things like this where he sort of comes out, and he's come out against Ruffini and said, like, despite what's been said, that it would be inappropriate for them to continue to use these images, which is so bleeding obvious to everyone, to every single person in the world. You just don't know why they're going along with it. So, it's great to see him coming out on this sort of side of things, but it makes this is the interesting thing, is that it makes you wonder. It doesn't seem like it's a very coherent narrative coming out of the Vatican, because you've got, the head of communications saying one thing. You'd have thought that he would have some idea of the way to handle these things, and yet what he said reeks of cognitive dissonance, doesn't it? It sort of doesn't chime well with the narrative that you would have thought the Vatican should be pursuing in this sort of area. And now you've got O'Malley completely at odds with that. So again, it's another sign of the chaos of Pope Francis, as far as I'm concerned. That's all I can say about it.
Maybe that's where the problem lies.
Seems like how could he be doing anything other than trying to please someone like the Pope? Because Ruffini's position was so obviously at odds, and at least O'Malley has got the bottle to stand up and say, now O'Malley's a Capuchin, and they're renowned. The Capuchins are renowned for taking the hardest jobs in the church, and that's not to say, I'm not saying for a second that he's got it right or he's got everything right, but he's certainly taken the fight. He's taken on the fight. He's the Cardinal Archbishop of Boston, which is obviously the epicenter for the abuse crisis in the USA. So he's taken the most difficult roles, and he's still there, after a number of years. So that in itself is something to be respected. And I've got more respect for him today, having come out on the right side of the Rupnik affair, definitely, which seems to put him at odds with the Holy Father and at odds with the Vatican communications lay expert.
Yeah, this certainly hasn't been well handled, has it, Gavin, this Rupnik affair? And no doubt it's another thing that your Anglican friends throw at you when they say, out of the frying pan into the fire, look at this terrible mess you've gone into. But this is perhaps a hopeful sign that Cardinal O'Malley is speaking up so forcefully about it and saying no more.
It is, but it's evoked in me two instincts that I seriously mistrust, and it worries me. Mobs are bad things and iconoclasts are bad things, but I'm very much drawn to the idea of iconoclastic mob taking the law into their own hands and smashing these bloody things. Not because of the art itself, but in order to show the victims, the nuns, the children, that if the hierarchy doesn't hear them, we the people do. And these are constant representations of injustice. Where's Alexander Trogel when you need him? I'd like to see Alexander say, okay, everyone turn up at Lourdes first week of August with a hammer in your luggage, and let's take this crap out. Because it's perfectly clear that the Vatican should have done it. Any person of conscience should have. It's our moral duty to protect the victims, and there's no ambiguity here. It's simply the decadence of an institution dragging its feet. So I mistrust my point of view enormously, but there's a very serious part of me that wants to take lay action with hammers to take this perverted stuff out of the sanctuaries and off holy places.
Well, it's interesting. That's like Bishop Micas, who's the Bishop of Lourdes Tarbes in France, has actually said that there are some people fighting to retain Rupnik's artwork, although he's not made in any way clear who or how many of those people are, which makes you think that it's just sort of a holding position, that it's just an excuse.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing, because you mentioned Alexander, now I was going to say Schugel, but I know your German is much better than mine. So
Deutscher für 2 Jahre gestudiert. Trogel. Alexander Trogel.
Right, okay.
Mein guten Freund.
There's a brilliant thing in one of the cathedrals in Austria where they had a horrendous statue of Mary giving birth. And
they dealt with it, yeah.
Your man's got in and saw the head of it. So, and you've got all the liberals screaming on Twitter about it and saying, oh, some self-righteous Catholic has gone in there. But if they engage in blasphemy in this way, if they engage in these provocative images, they really shouldn't be surprised if people are offended, because this is something so close to the Catholic heart, isn't it? It's just absolutely inappropriate and ridiculous. And they're trying to profane it.
Yeah. And it's just ugly. It's just ugly art, isn't it? And you can understand the argument that we're all sinners and that some of the Renaissance painters wouldn't have been saints, and yet we don't destroy all their art. I understand that's what some people say, but this is not the same thing. This is a different story. First of all, this art has a real ugliness to it. It's not beautiful, and people recognise beauty, and they also, there's a sense in which, because it's so ugly, it's kind of like from the sewer that is the man who could do this thing, this has been produced, rather than the fallen sinner that he is. By God's grace, he's produced some beauty. The art seems to match that sort of horrible sewer rot that is what we've found out about his behaviour. So there's not even an argument, I think, to say let's maintain the art because it's so beautiful, taken outside the man and separate the two.
Catherine, this is a really important point. I'm glad you raised it, because otherwise people might think that I was taking the iconoclastic, thing that we're entitled to judge all art morally. And so I wasn't suggesting that because Rupnik is a decadent man, we should destroy the art. I'm suggesting that the art should be destroyed in order to protect the victims. The question of the relationship between the integrity of the artist and the art itself is a much more complicated one, and but I think we can short-circuit it, in my view, because it's essentially all about taking public steps to show the complainants that they've been heard and that they take precedence. So thank you for making that distinction, because the other argument's really quite complex and needs dealing with at length.
Yeah, these are awful crimes against women, against nuns, and they still live now. They still have to see this now, and we all know what he's done now in this living moment. This is not a retrospective looking back at history and annihilating somebody's character. This, as you say, so this has real impact now, and it's absolutely unjustifiable to keep this up in the face of all the allegations that against him and what we know he's done. Mark, what have you just pulled up here?
Well, this is the statue in
so
Austria.
Small, I can't think.
It looks
the Mary one, yes.
awful, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so this is you can notice that they're missing the bottom portion, which I can only imagine is even more horrendous. And then the other picture is of it from the back. And there, so no head. Someone's obviously gone in there and sorted it right out. Well done, whoever that was. A round of applause from Catholic Unscripted.
only Mark can say the phrase "sorted it right out" with a wonderful air of fantastic British threat. If I said it, it wouldn't carry anything like the authoritative weight that Mark does. Sort it right out. It sounds better in Mark's mouth. Wonderful, very frightening.
Yeah, well done, lads. Gavin's going to bring the hammers to Lourdes, but Mark's always fake to smash the head off.
You know what a nemesis is.
Brilliant. Right. Moving on to the next story, which is that Vatican ex-Auditor General Libero Milone says that Pell's death is shrouded in mystery. So this is a story about how there's some really strange things coming out of this story about Pell and his death in this hospital, and no doctors being around to speak to, and his body left at the time of the the autopsy, and loads of questions still remaining. And I think the pillar tried to make contact and couldn't get anywhere. And so this guy, Libero Milone, what do we know about him, Mark? And I'm sure I'm butchering his name, Milone, Milone.
No,
what do you know about
Milone? He worked basically with Pell at the finance office. So and he's vowed to find out what actually happened. Now I'm a bit of a skeptic with this particular story. I have been a bit of a skeptic, and when it rose its head yesterday, Edward Penton brought it forward. Now I know Gavin's knows a lot more about this than I do, but I sort of had a chat with my brother-in-law, who's a leading hip surgeon, because Pell. So all right, let's go from the beginning, shall we? So Pell, as we know, was looking into all the Vatican finances. If you don't know, I had first-hand experience of this because I met him when he was over for something, and I had a couple of pints with him, and I tried to have a chat with him. What's going on, Cardinal Pell? And if you know Cardinal Pell, he was brilliant. Right, he was my sort of cardinal, really down to earth, a man's man. And he was like, well, you know, Mark, leave all that to us, and you just continue to say your prayers. And anyway, that didn't go so well for him because he ended up being accused of child abuse. He was accused of abusing 2 children in the cathedral sacristy. I mean, if anyone knows anything about sacristies or cathedrals after mass, if you read the accusations, there's loads of stuff on this on my blog. It was the most ridiculous thing in the world. And as the trial was going on, we all thought, oh my goodness me, it's embarrassing that they've brought this. And then he was convicted, and then he went to prison, and there was an appeal, and it was quashed, thrown out under appeal. It was obviously nonsense, but there was a large amount of money transferred to Australia from the Vatican Bank. Some people are accusing Cardinal Betu, who was sort of his arch nemesis in the Vatican Bank, about it. Anyway, the whole thing is horrible, messy, nasty. We don't know what happened, but the next thing, he was, there was that horrible thing where he went to the where he sort of came back and met Francis, and Francis pulled his hand away as he tried to kiss the papal ring. And then the next thing, he went in for a routine hip operation, and he died on the operating table. He was 81, and it was a dreadful loss to a lot of us because, I mean, he really was a proper prince of the church and was doing amazing work. But as I was saying, I did speak to my brother-in-law as a surgeon, and I did speak to him about, you know, that sort of thing. How does that work out? What's the morbidity rate like? And he was saying, it's pretty good. You know, people don't really die. Or, you know, you're not likely to die unless you've got an obvious comorbidity, which Pell, to the best of any of our knowledge, everything I've heard, didn't have any comorbidities. Obviously, there's a risk factor involved, but generally speaking, at that age, if you're in good health, there should be no problem for you going in and having a hip replacement. So, and obviously the hospital should have done that due diligence before he went in there. So it does leave us, I mean, obviously it was desperately sad, and that was how I felt. I felt like, thank God he's got, you know, like he's gone to his eternal reward. And after what he'd been through in the prison, which was absolutely horrendous, you know, I felt so much for him, and wrote to him while he was in prison and all that sort of stuff. But you just kind of, and to be accused, for a man like Pell, when you met him, he was just such a man's man. It was like, it's almost the worst thing you could be accused of, you know, if you're a father, and it's just awful. So I feel the whole thing is just another horrendous black mark on Pope Francis' papacy. Whatever, there was no support for him or anything like that, whatever the truth of it is. But it's interesting that this guy, who's deeply embedded in the Vatican, has come out now and is sort of casting aspersion as to whether it was under natural causes or something more spurious.
Well, speaking of disgraced Cardinal Betu, he's now complaining that there's been a great miscarriage of justice.
He was the guy basically who Pell organised an audit by PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Betu called it off. Betu cancelled it, and so they, you know, there's obviously something going on there, isn't there? You know.
Yeah, Betu's now saying I didn't get anything. It was all perfectly legitimate, and all I've done is serve the church, and I'm so poor and I'm so humble, and you know I haven't benefited at all. And it's even at odds with the things that he accepted in the trial that demonstrated where the money went. And so I don't know why he's protesting in this way now, but obviously there's a tie there with that Cardinal Pell story. Gavin, what do you make of this that there might be more to the story of Cardinal Pell's death than meets the eye?
Well, I find myself once again reflecting reflex populism. When I heard of the death, I had a very strong instinctive intuition that he'd been killed, he'd been murdered. This is ridiculous. I shouldn't have such thoughts. But frankly, the level of conspiracy against him that got him stitched up in Australia required such, if you like, complex conspiracy that simply finding a way of finishing a vulnerable old man off in an operating theatre doesn't compare to it. I know it's conspiratorial, I know it's slightly neurotic, but the role that he was about to play in the new conclave was enormous. Only he had the authority. He had already reached out to the other cardinals. He was organising a move to ensure that the next election was going to favour somebody who'd look after and protect the Catholic Church. And as Mark's brother-in-law quite rightly says, the chances of him dying on the operating table simply because of 80 were very slim indeed. The chances of him being knocked off, given what's happened to him, higher, I think. So I'm a bit embarrassed by my reflex reactions, but when at the moment I saw the fact that somebody was beginning to bring to light facts that suggested he didn't simply die through comorbidities, I thought, yeah, that's right. That's what I thought.
Yeah. Well, I suppose just watch this space. We hope that it doesn't look like Libero Maloney's going to give up, does it, Mark? He's quite dogged and determined to get to the bottom of this.
Seems that way. I mean, I don't know much about the guy, to be honest, but except that he's obviously he must have something because he's right there in the thick of it with Pell. So, and he obviously knew Pell well enough to have built up some respect for the man and for the man's integrity. I mean, you know, I've met lots of cardinals and bishops and stuff like that, and Pell is one of those guys who, when you met him, he was something special. That's, you know, that really head and shoulders. You know, he really was someone you were proud to call a prince of the church, proud to call a cardinal. And I just think what happened to him was absolutely so sad. You know, it's like Zen. Like Zen is another one who I know Anthony at Avoiding Babylon was saying, you know, everyone loves Zen. Everyone thinks he's brilliant. He stood up against China. You know, he's like incredibly erudite, incredibly faithful, and
now incredibly funny.
Yeah, you got this guy, you know, yeah, and that's it. He's very witty, and that's.
Can I just say that as far as I know, with my colleagues, Cardinal ZEN, none of us have any tattoos. Although two of us do have beards, but we're willing to take advice on how they're shaped.
Yeah, I'm growing mine. Just it's bigger than it looks, Cardinal ZEN. Gavin's got a little beard.
I'll shrink my head instead. If the beard and the head are out of proportion, I'll try and shrink the head instead.
Well, we think that was not so much an attack against all big men with small beards, but
oh, thank you so much.
No. Yeah, well, I mean, I think we just need to pray for all people working in the church who are working to uncover a lot of the darkness that's going on, because there is some dark old shenanigans going on in the church. There always has been, but although there will be more at certain times than others. And we know people who've worked, and you spoke yourself to Zolna, Gavin, and he spoke about working to try and uncover some of the scandals in the church. And these people need our prayers. It's a really, really tough job, and they're facing threats and taking risks on behalf of truth, really, of exposing the truth. So we don't know any more than that, but let's just pray for those continuing to try and see if there's anything that needs to be brought to light, that it will be. So the next thing is that there's a Tory MP over here. For those of you in the US, there's a Conservative MP called Miriam Cates. The Conservative Party, as you all know, are the party in power at the moment, at least today, maybe not by tomorrow. And Miriam Cates has been a really good MP. She's actually been, shock horror, a conservative. She believes in traditional values. She's stood up for the family. She does a lot of work standing up for the family and for policies that will help strengthen the family. She's also spoken out against the trans ideology in the way that it mutilates children and so on. And so, as you might imagine, the left hate her. She's a beautiful woman. She's an articulate woman. She's a funny woman. I've heard her speak in person as well as read the things she's written and heard her speak publicly. And she's just very charming and very smart and has real integrity. So she's, as far as we can tell, she's really one of the good ones. But it's almost like they're just really scraping the barrel, isn't it, Mark and Gavin? It's really tenuous attempt before the election to attack her. And the BBC have run a story saying Tory candidate, this is Miriam Cates, was trustee of a church that endorsed conversion therapy. And then you read the article and it's hard to know there's some church, it may have been Baptist, I don't know, was it Baptist? And at some point 10 years ago, there's reports of people praying the gay away, that kind of thing. You're doing kind of exorcisms, and people reporting that there was meetings where people would cheer and say, "My son's no longer gay," and lots of this sort of thing. And apparently Miriam Cates has been a trustee of this church, but she wasn't even a trustee at the time these allegations were made. She no longer is now, and there's absolutely no link between her and this story, and yet they're trying to smear her by making this really tenuous link. It's so transparent. I'm hoping most people will just see it for what it is.
Conversion therapy is at the heart of being a Catholic. Every time we go to confession and seek absolution, we're in the process of being converted, and this is one of the tricks of the left in order to silence and criminalize Christianity. There's nothing we can do about it. If we thought it was bad up until today, wait until tomorrow. It will get a very great deal worse under the new left government. But you're right. This is another form of demonization. It's another example, and a very serious one, of trying to drive Christians out of the public square. There's half a dozen cases going on with Christians in the professional workplace, including there's a social worker called Felix Negoli. And the judiciary are siding with the left, saying because he believes in Christian marriage, he can't be entrusted as a social worker to have any pastoral responsibility for anybody ever. I think it's time we stop being aghast at the outrageousness of the left. The fact is, this is the dark world we're going into, and my goodness, from tomorrow, it's going to get very, very much worse.
I'm afraid it is. There's quite a funny episode of Friends where Phoebe marries a gay ice dancer, so she understands, when she's younger. And she's sort of always yearned for him and wanted to really be married to him. But she only married him, I think, to give him a green card. And by the end of the episode, we see him reveal to her that he's got this thing he's struggled with his whole life. And she says, "What is it?" And he says, "I have to tell you something. I've had these feelings since I was a young teen." And she says, "What?" And he says, "I think I might be straight." And she says, "What?" And of course, it's a deeper offence to her because she always secretly harboured an attraction to him. And it turns out the gay ice dancer was in fact straight and is going off to marry a woman. Ha ha. But it raises quite an interesting point, which is you can see that it's a sort of ideology, a kind of this hook onto the importance of ideology before actually a policy that is based on logic and evidence. It's actually driven by this idea that, well, gay wins all, basically. And because if anybody gay ever says they think they might be not gay, people don't celebrate that. And they say, "Well, you must be wrong. You must be wrong. You can't. This is not a good thing, and you must have been converted, and there must be some dark dealings, or you must have gone to an exorcism." We don't accept it. Whereas if someone like Philip Schofield, who was married for 25 years, 30 years with kids, suddenly says, "I'm actually gay and have a young lover," people are celebrating, waving flags. "This is wonderful news, Philip Schofield. It's so wonderful that you've been cheating on your wife with a young boy for the last 30 years. And God knows if it was only just one." And it's just this complete hypocrisy, isn't it? Where you can see it's actually not about caring for people and compassion for them and their rights. It's just about saying, we want people to say they're gay and we don't want anyone to tell them they can't be because gay is brilliant. Mark?
I just tell
Gavin?
Very sweet of you. Can I tell a very quick anecdote? I know we've got much time. I'll make it quick. I used to be a pro-LGBT plus advocate. One of the
Get
when I was at
out.
university, outside my academic door, one of my students used to sit with her girlfriend on her lap to sort of provocatively, and I was hugely defensive of her, for her, and so on. 10 years later, after she graduated, we were on Zoom or something one night, and I saw her. She was in New York. Hi, how are you doing? Oh, Gav, it's great. Rejoicing I'm getting married. Oh, who's the lucky girl? No, it's a man. Wait a minute, I thought you were gay. I went to the barricades for you to be gay when you were 21. What do you mean it's a man? And then she explained how she met this fantastic male academic she'd fallen in love with and how wonderful he was. I said, well, were you never gay? And she kind of shuffled awkwardly and said, well, girls move in and out of that zone. And I can't tell you how many of my undergraduates that I knew as gay, after a few years, became in inverted commas straight. There was indeed a level of fluidity. But as you quite rightly said, you're only allowed to celebrate it when it goes one way. But in fact, there's an enormous amount of traffic of the other way. We're not allowed to talk about it, let alone recognize it, let alone pray for it, let alone support it. Again, it's a criminalization of the Christian conscience.
Yeah. Mark, what do you think?
Lots of stuff. I think this is really important.
You're in a safe space, Mark.
I think that this was on BBC Radio 4's flagship morning news program. That's where it came to my attention, and I was gobsmacked to hear, because the way that they reported it was sort of like Miriam Cates, she hates gay people because of there's a connection. We can't really explain what it is or how it works, but someone from Bernardo's said it once and we're going along with it. And I immediately thought, what, Bernardo, what's this got? What Bernardo's have got this. They're a children's charity, Why are they going after Cates? And it has to be all tied in with the anti-trans, the pro-science sort of position that they've been trying to push. And as you rightly said, it's like Miriam Cates and Kemi Badenoch are the only two Tories in the Tory party. The only two true Conservatives in the Conservative Party, and so they've got to do something about it. But the fact that it was so blatantly ideological, and there was no balance to the story, was what really did confront. It really was obvious and really sort of shocked me. Have we moved to that position? But as Gavin was saying, it's so interesting if you think about it philosophically and sort of psychologically, because the LGBT, even if we talk about LGBT, the things don't even add up, do they? Because you've got, the gay thing. So you've got the LG thing where we're talking about you're born this way. That's and there's nothing you can do about it. You're just born that way. And that it's your identity is fundamental to your sexual preference is fundamental to who you are. And then we're talking about trans ideology or queer ideology, where the thing is completely fluid, and one time you feel like one thing and another time you feel like something else. The whole thing is just so incoherent as to be laughable, that you wouldn't think that any serious news program would go near it with a barge pole, really, because there's it's quite obviously problematic. And so how can you look at this thing with Miriam Cates as anything other than an attempt to discredit her politically? And it just seems like obvious political bias, doesn't it? Or am I missing something?
Well, it's the BBC, right? It's the BBC.
Oh,
you
and
say
this
no
is the thing, but this is the thing. It's just,
formally, this pride of Britain is just lost. I mean, people are giving up on the BBC and they're not wanting to pay their licence fee, and who can blame them if they're producing a story like this and calling it news when it's just a ridiculous, tenuous, desperate smear campaign against Miriam Cates. As you said, Miriam Cates and Kemi Badenoch, two brilliant women who are true Conservatives, smart women. And just recently, last week or the week before, little David Tennant of the Doctor Who programme started. He was picking up an LGBTQ award and was saying essentially he wished Kemi Badenoch would die, and if she won't die, at least shut up, because of her conservative stance. He's an actor. I mean, be quiet. Okay, they're lining your pockets, the LGBT lobby are lining your pockets. Sure, okay, but still have a little integrity, man. I think it's an absolute disgrace that these women, and the funny thing is, this is from often the left, a party that espouses diversity, equality,
Inclusion.
inclusivity. The Labour Party's never, it's not as diverse as the Conservative Party. Inclusivity, yeah, if you've got the right opinions. Diversity of anything except viewpoints. And it's just, it's really ridiculous. And I feel sorry for these women, but I know they're tough women with real courage. So they'll withstand these attacks, but they shouldn't have to face them in the first place.
Well, that's exactly the irony. That's what thank you for saying that, because it is the irony of the left that, that they're inclusive up until the point where you disagree with them. And if you think about that kind of rhetoric that you're saying about David Tennant, that's driving the very kind of violence that really, and the lack of respect that we don't want to see in political discourse.
Yeah. And not allowing any room for nuance. Because actually, if you look at Miriam Kate, who has stood up against some of the extreme transgender sort of advocates, it's really a gentle concern for young people who may be confused, but they paint it as if, oh, you hate trans people, you hate gay people, you're a bigot, you want to strip away our rights, we have to be careful against these Nazis. This is always the rhetoric against people who really are just, I would say, very compassionate and understand that things are not always as simple as they may seem. Dave Chappelle, who is not everyone's cup of tea on Netflix, is an American comedian, and he does quite a good skit. Very, very sweary, by the way, if anyone doesn't want to be scandalised. But he does a very good skit about what you just said exactly there, Mark, which is, what on earth has the L's and the B's and the G's and the T's got to do with the Q's and the I's, and lumping them all together is just an insult. It's like, oh, all you oddballs who aren't like the normies, we'll just stick you all in a taxi, and they're all arguing with each other, and it's just utterly ridiculous. But I would recommend to those who aren't of faint disposition or about to go in for hip surgery to check out Dave Chappelle on Netflix. So, well, that brings us, I think, Gavin, to your fantastic article that you have just had published today called Islam in British Democracy and the Dangers to Our Jewish Neighbours. And Mark, you just said when we were discussing Kate's that that kind of response by Tennant and others actually whips up anger and whips up this kind of antagonism between people, and actually encourages the kind of abuse that we've seen against Badenoch and Kate. And actually, that's really awful thing to do, because we've seen the real world effects of MPs who have who have been murdered and attacked, physically attacked, by people whipped up into such a frenzy. Now, Mark, I mentioned at the beginning your MP was murdered by Islamists, and now Anna Firth is the MP who replaced him, and she wrote quite a tough article. Was it February this year?
Yeah,
I think
it went into the Sunday Telegraph, and it's well worth reading, actually, because in it she recounts an anecdote about visiting a mosque after the October attacks by Hamas, and the subsequent war in Gaza, where she sort of went into the mosque to see if she could offer any help to the families who are stuck in Gaza, and found herself in a position where she was being quite frighteningly attacked and being called, like a murderer. Obviously, on the back of the fact that Sir David Amess, our MP in Southend West, was brutally stabbed to death at a sort of surgery that he used to hold for constituents. Someone just came in and just attacked him with a knife.
That's just for anyone who's not a British viewer. That's just where you station yourself as a local MP, and you have a time where people can come in and ask you any questions, the public, and
nothing to do with actual doctors.
No, nothing to do with actual medical practice.
So this is on Anna's website here, but you can see it went into the Sunday Telegraph on the 25th of February this year, And she says, I also have a mosque in my constituency. So a few weeks later, I reached out to see if I could do anything to support them, especially in terms of organising humanitarian help for the innocent people of Gaza. I was invited inside and offered a seat before being surrounded by a number of men and one woman. She immediately started shouting, jabbing a finger in my face, and demanding to know how many babies had to die to satisfy my bloodlust. My aide was with me, suggested that we should leave. So, and then she goes on to say a few days later she was at there was an anti-war in the Middle East march in Southend with dolls covered in fake blood scattered on the pavement, people holding placards saying Anna Firth kills babies. I was horrified. A police officer stood by and watched but did nothing. I mean, it's about the intimidation that MPs face as a result of this sort of thing, and Gavin's article addresses it brilliantly. So perhaps,
Gavin. So that brings us on. That brings us on to your article today, which I've said is titled "Islam in British Democracy and the Dangers to Our Jewish Neighbours," and I think it's a really brilliant exposition of the situation we're in. What can you tell us about? Well, you can read it here. So check out all the links. You'll see Gavin's interview with Zollner. You'll see that article mentioned by Anna Firth, and you'll see Gavin's article, which he's just about to tell us more of now. That was a really bad sentence.
Put it into 30 seconds, if I can. The whole of my life, the influence of Auschwitz has cast a shadow, which ought to have outlawed anti-Semitism on every imaginable ethical ground. And in the last 5 years, that popular distaste and horror of anti-Semitism has given way, first of all, on the left. And the reason it's given way on the left is because the Labour Party depend upon Islamic votes, and they didn't know how close the election would be, but they've always courted Islamic votes. But the price of Islamic support was to hate Israel and to hate Jews. And I assumed when this began that the Labour Party would resist this as a gross form of immorality, but they've actually embraced it. As it happens, because of the Islamic demographic, there are 4 constituencies where Muslims are over 50% of the electorate. Out of 220 marginal seats, in 129 of them, Muslims are the largest religious minority. So in a delicate political situation, they have the power to swing the election. Now, as it happens, we're not in a delicate situation. The Conservatives have been so entirely crap, if you find me, excuse me, reaching for a Latin word, that they're going to lose the election hand down, and so it's not the issue. But if you look at what's happening in France for the moment, this wonderful novel by Michel Houellebecq, written in 2015, saw the rise of Islam and predicated the conversion of France to Islam, because of the left would be so horrified about a Le Pen right-wing government that they do deal with anybody, including Islam. Well, that hasn't happened yet, but on the streets of France at the moment, in the middle of the election, you have huge numbers of Muslims and Palestinians burning France, burning Paris. And in other parts of the city, you have French right-wing Democrats singing songs to Marseillaise. We don't know what's going to happen yet. Macron himself says there could be a civil war. It blames the right, of course, but it's not the right who are going to the barricades, it's the left. What's going to happen here? Well, we're different. It's extremely difficult to know, but it's certainly the case that the foreign policy of the British government looks like it's going to be dictated and determined by Muhammad's hatred of Jews, which is enshrined in the Quran and the Hadith. And nobody finds this execrable, ethically impossible. Very few people are raising a furious protest that the Jews amongst us, our Jewish neighbours, are saying we can't live here anymore. We have to go and find safe sanctuary. And the only place they can go, of course, is Israel. So at the moment, it isn't going to affect the election tomorrow, but it is going to affect our public climate. I noticed that just before we came on, Rod Dreher retweeted my article, and immediately afterwards he followed it up by, I've just seen an Israeli 12-year-old child has been interviewed by Prevent because he tweeted something against Hamas. They come to interview him as a potential terrorist under the terrorist legislation, essentially because he's Jewish. So tomorrow, things are not going to get immediately worse tomorrow, but they're going to start getting a great deal worse tomorrow. And it's because we have imported the hatred of Islam into our democratic process. And God help the Jews. God help the rest of us who don't believe that anti-Semitism, whoever it's held by, whether it's held by the Nazis or by the new Islamic right, is acceptable. But we're going to have to fight. We're literally going to have, I mean, I hope we don't literally have to fight, but we're certainly going to have to engage in a serious ideological, democratic conflict with Islam and the left who are embracing the prejudices of Islam if we're going to protect our Jewish neighbours.
That book by Michael Holobeck is Submission, by the way, and that's a really interesting read. And as you say, remarkable that it came out on the day of the Charlie Hebdo murders, and paints quite a picture. The prevent duty is terrible. This is a so-called safeguarding task force that was set up in Britain, and it's really awful as far as I know, and it's been used. It's gone into schools, and there were accusations made against them about being focused on Islamic extremism, and so to counter that, they decided they had to talk about right-wing extremism and Christian extremism, and they've been known to go into Catholic schools and say people praying the rosary in large groups in the public is extremism, and they've got their own sort of idea about what, and by all accounts, it's completely ineffective. They haven't really done much to reduce radicalisation, and now they're going after this Jewish student for tweeting against Hamas, for tweeting. So I think prevent are disastrous for education. Well, there we go.
If that's everything, I just wanted to have a little end note here that earlier on, Larry Chapp, going back to the Cardinal ZEN Michael Lofton story, Larry Chapp, Gavin's best mate and excellent professor in America, tweeted that the number one problem for me with Lofton's Reason and Theology channel is not that it's uncharitable to papal critics. My chief problem is that it's just boring. I can never get through an entire episode. I rarely get past 5 minutes. To which I responded, no specific problems with the beard size yourself then, Larry, which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah.
And Larry replied, his beard is boring too.
I love it. I just realised I might be one of the few podcasters who doesn't have a beard.
Yeah, but you're a lady. You're allowed not to.
Yes, I know, but anything goes these days, Mark. Come on, get with the programme. We seem to have lost Gavin. We want to sign off, but he may appear because when we do the final edit, all of the streams come together, and although he's lost from our vision, he may still be here. So we don't know whether you're looking at 2 of us or 3 of us, but either way, I think we'll have to draw this to a close. And say thank you very much for sticking with us and for watching. Do please check out the website, as always, catholicunscripted.com, and take a look at the memberships. For those of you that haven't had a look, there are both membership options and options to just make one-off donations. Anything you can do to help us will be hugely appreciated and helps us to sustain what we do. And if you pick up a silver or gold membership, you can get daily news broadcasts from myself and Gavin Ashenden sent straight to your inbox, and blogs from the wonderful Mark Lambert, and our silver members will have just read one published today. So please check out the membership options. And as always, email on info@catholicunscripted.com if you have any queries. But for now, that's it. Thank you for watching. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden. So sorry, my phone crashed. I'm back. Only to say goodbye. I thought I had plenty of battery, but I haven't. Anyway, thank you for listening. God bless. Goodbye.